Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Educator Experience podcast. My name is Sally Carter, and we have had a few conversations over the past year that we've now been sharing this podcast that have touched on AI in education. But today we're going deeper. I'm joined by Monica Marquez. She's a workplace AI strategist, leadership, learning, and inclusion expert, as well as a serial entrepreneur. She's the founder of Flipwork Inc., the only enterprise wide AI workforce transformation system that ensures Fortune 500 companies adapt quickly to disruptive change. What do you mean, disruptive change? What? There's none of that happening, right? But Flipwork helps employees at every level adopt AI successfully by transforming how people see, think, and work so they can keep pace with this ever changing rapid world. She publishes AI, a weekly newsletter that gives leaders 5 minutes of clear, actionable guidance on how to thrive in the age of AI. We've included the links to her company as well as a newsletter below in our show notes too. So I invite you to check them out. In this conversation, we get into what are employers really wanting from our graduates? And what do we as educators need to be teaching or focusing on in our classrooms? These are questions many of us are sitting with right now, especially as the pace of change continues to accelerate. AI is here, it's not going away. How do we navigate it? So, we're seeing students use AI every day, often with a high level of confidence. But at the same time, we're hearing from employers, and this discussion will emphasize that something is really missing. So, not necessarily the ability to use the tools, but the ability to think critically about them, to apply them in real world contexts, and to make informed decisions alongside them. There is what appears to be a growing gap between exposure and capability, between knowing what AI can do and then understanding how to use it responsibly, effectively, and strategically in the workplace. So today's conversation really is about unpacking that gap. What does AI readiness, and I say that in quotes for folks who don't watch on YouTube, but who are just listening. What does AI readiness actually mean from an employer perspective? Where are graduates falling short and why? And perhaps most importantly, what is our role as educators in helping students not just keep up with this technology, but learn how to think, adapt, and lead in an AI enabled or partnered world? So, this isn't just a conversation about technology, it's a conversation about skills, identity, and really the future of work. So let's hop right into my conversation with the lovely Monica Marquez. Being an educator is one heck of a lonely journey, but every step holds a story, an experience that shapes how we teach, learn, and grow. Welcome to the Educator Experience. I'm your host, Sally Carter, and together we'll explore the moments that define us as educators. Through authentic conversations and shared experiences, we're building a community that connects, reflects, and inspires, all while breaking down barriers in education, one story at a time. You are not alone. Let's grow together. Monica, where are you joining from today?
So today I'm joining you from my home in Texas. I split my time between New York and Texas. I grew up in West Texas and, traditional Mexican American family, oldest daughter, went off to college, Texas Tech. And then after I got my master's, I packed up my books, my bags and books, and moved to New York City and figured if I could make it there, I could make it anywhere. Thought I was only going to be there for a few years or a couple of years. And I ended up, being there for about 24 years or so. And then elder
Gosh,
care reasons brought me back to Texas, so just kind of been splitting my time.
that's awesome. And then, so are you open to sharing a little bit about your history? So, what
Sure.
happened after Texas Tech to where you are now and your
Yeah,
involvement in
certainly.
education?
Certainly, I mean, I guess the through line of my career has always been somewhat in the realm of education. My master's is in higher education, student development theory, adult learning. And so when I first left Texas, packed up my bags, went to New York City. It was actually right around 9/11. And some of my family thought I was crazy. And I was like, listen, if the good Lord wants to take me, he's going to take me if I'm crossing the street,
Yeah.
so I ended up just going, which was actually the best time to ever move to New York City because, to be quite honest, it was the environment or the culture of people, they all came together and were just trying to be very helpful after the tragedies that happened. But I was just fortunate that I was looking for jobs in higher ed at the time. And I got a job at the School of Visual Arts. They were, working on their 4-year accreditation. At NYU, started focusing also on their study abroad programs. I started off being, heading up admissions at NYU study abroad programs, encouraging students to immerse themselves in other cultures and like actually go to another country, immerse yourself and kind of learn there. So it was a really interesting role that I was doing. But ironically, around that time, and I'm dating myself because this was very early 2000s.
We tend to do that sometimes, don't we? Yeah.
Yes, very early 2000s is when I think a lot of organizations and companies, Wall Street, they started doing business in emerging markets and realizing that they needed to educate their workers on just their cultural competency. And it would just so happen I had a friend who was a lead recruiter at Goldman Sachs, and she tapped my shoulder and said, "Hey, I think there's this perfect role for you." And I was naive at the time, and I'm like, what would I wanna do on Wall Street? Like, all my only reference to Wall Street was Wolf of Wall Street, the old movie, and I was like, "I don't wanna go to that cutthroat, like, environment," and she's like, "No, no, no, you don't understand. There's lots of things going on in emerging markets and other countries, and they want to really start educating their people on their cultural competency and how do you do business and how do you understand other cultures and be respectful and all that kind of stuff." And so that was when there were the kind of overall diversity and inclusion and those types of offices started popping up in all of these companies. So I was kind of in that beginning of the space where, it did turn into the whole representation thing, but it was never really about that. It was about business. It was about how do you do business in other cultures and in other countries and embrace their culture and understand their needs and things like that. And so I did that for many, many years. And from there, was working on kind of how do you immerse people and get them to learn about other cultures, become culturally competent, and then went into the recruiting space of how do you then it turned into the representation. Rather than educating people about other cultures, why don't you find people from those cultures to work for you so that they could kind
Yes,
of,
yes,
bridge
right?
that gap.
A little bit easier.
Yeah, and so it turned into that whole, I became head of diversity recruiting at Goldman Sachs and really trying to get people from different backgrounds and women and others to kind of come into this world, understanding the types of roles that were there for them. So I did that all along and then kind of moved over where I would bring these individuals in, but I would see they were still struggling in the workplace of, they would come 2, 3 years, they kind of decide to leave. And it was like, why aren't they being successful? Why aren't they moving up as quickly as their non-diverse peers? And so then I shifted over into talent management, which was a little bit about how do you help develop people and into those what are those leadership skill sets and things that they need in order to keep going. And that's when I started really getting into leadership development and just really professional development, career development. Loved my time at Goldman, but then left to become head of leadership development at Bank of America for the global banking and markets team. And then from there, found myself moving to the West Coast because of life. Life
Love
took
the
me to the
West
West
Coast.
Coast with my partner at the time, and I started working for Ernst and Young, where I was heading up all of diversity and inclusion for the West Coast for Ernst and Young. And while I was on the West Coast, I had some former colleagues from Goldman who had gone to Google, who then started knocking on my door saying, "Hey, we want you to build what you built, at these other companies at Google."
Do that.
And so I found myself at Google doing some really fun, exciting, kind of really cool work. But my through line was always how do you help individuals? How do you help people really bring out the full potential so that they can be successful? And that's what, I did at all of these organizations. And I found myself kind of at this juxtaposition of I'd gone to all of these companies, really amazing companies, really great cultures, doing great things, but I felt myself kind of like constrained to the four walls of that organization. And I knew
Mhm.
that there was bigger change to happen outside of those organizations. So that's when I decided to step out and kind of venture out on my own and started my first company with my wife, Nikki, who was a serial entrepreneur who was really successful, had won all kinds of awards for being, a top female entrepreneur. She convinced me to build something with her. And we built our first company, which was Beyond Barriers, which was, an AI powered kind of professional development company. And then we exited that because I really saw the writing on the wall with AI of, wow, this is going to disrupt people faster than they know how to change. This is going to change work and life faster than people are wired. Their brains are wired to change. How do we help people disrupt themselves before they get disrupted? And so that was where Flipwork was born, of getting people to understand that AI is going to, definitely disrupt your work. It's not a matter of if, but when. And if you don't get ahead of it, you're going to get left behind. And so I always
Mhm.
tell people is AI isn't going to replace you, but someone who leverages AI is going to replace you in doing the
Yes.
jobs that you do. So why don't you make sure that you invest in yourself and get ahead? And so really kind of that's the through line of my career, kind of in a nutshell, of like all along trying to figure out how do you help people, the underdog. The beauty about AI is that it can be the level playing field, because really now you have accessibility to the intelligence that you may not have had due to, you didn't have proximity to
Advancements.
the right people or
Yeah.
to the smartest people. Now it's at your fingertips and you just have to learn to leverage it in the right way so that you can get ahead.
Yeah, it's like having a partner, as
Yes.
someone you can ask and yeah,
Yes.
seems smarter than you are, at
Yeah.
least temporarily. But
Yeah.
so how does your business help bridge that gap then? What specifically are you offering or are you doing for people to become more, I guess, competent with AI skills,
Yeah.
or is it more change management?
We love to say that, we help people become more agentic humans. It's not about learning the AI or AI taking over. It is, how do you become people squared, right? How do you use AI to amplify your own zone of genius, right? But that's really hard to do sometimes. And so I'm fortunate that I have lots of colleagues in some of these amazing companies who are now senior leaders in the, HR space, learning space, all of these types of things. But they started coming to me saying, "Hey, we're running into this conundrum where our companies are super supportive of AI. We've rolled out all these AI tools, but people aren't adopting them the way that we thought they would. What is going on?" And so when I really kind of stepped back and we started to peel the onion and we started to kind of like talk to people and understand why teams weren't leveraging the AI, it came down to the fact that it's not a technical problem. It's not a skills problem. They're very, capable and very intelligent people. But there are some behavioral things going on that is stopping them from adopting. And part of it is what we like to call at Flipwork the identity bottleneck, right? We have been taught for the past 20, 30 years that effort equals success, right? If I'm first one in, last one out, if I put in the elbow grease and the grit and I work really, really hard, I'm going to get rewarded. And I have been rewarded for this really hard work and this effort that I put into my work. Okay. Now you've given me this AI tool, and I usually do this analyst report or this analysis, this weekly analysis report, and it takes me the better part of 8 hours to do. But now I'm using AI and it takes me 60 minutes. And so you're like, wait a minute, it feels effortless now.
Yeah,
And
off
now
balance.
effort equals success. Like I'm not going to get rewarded. Or my manager's going to think that I'm being lazy or I'm cheating or something. So I'm going to shun it, or I don't trust it, or this is too good to be true kind of thing. And so we fall back into this effort equals success. And so we try to teach people to really start to focus on the human and AI, and really also from a mindset perspective. How do you rewire your brain to understand that it's impact equals success? How much more impact could you have if you partner with or you augment your intelligence with AI so that you could have better outcomes, and more impact? And so rewiring your brain to start thinking impact equals success post AI. Pre AI, it was definitely effort equals success. But the hard part is getting people to step back and understand, what is my zone of genius?
Um,
What am I super good at that just comes effortless to me that AI cannot replace? And that is the judgment, the lived experience, the creativity, the contextual knowledge that you have, that you've gained through education or through your work or your experience, and you augment that with the AI where you become what we say people squared. And so it's really getting people to understand a new framework and kind of rewiring their brain to start to understand its impact equals success post AI. And you have to reinvent yourself, right? So it's
Mm.
reinventing your role in this post AI world and really reinventing your workflows and understanding what do you delegate to AI and what do you keep and keep the human in the loop so that you make the impact and the output better.
Mhm. It's a really big change management and, as you said, mindset
Yes.
loop and
Yes.
rethinking, revisiting that, which can be challenging for us mature, dating myself here, us older folks too, when we've grown up a certain way and we've done things a certain way. And same as educators, I think too. I'm actually in a space right now where I'm working with a university to bring in AI specific type of training and then working with folks at different varying levels
Hmm.
of their own mindset into adoption. I am against it. I don't want to use it in my classroom, but
Yes.
my students are using it. And so I'm forced to figure this out. Or
Yes.
I can't have the mindset that I had before. How can I ask or how can I openly receive feedback in order to adopt to the changing times? I
Yes.
think that what I'm seeing in higher ed specifically is sometimes students are moving faster than educators and that institutions themselves are lagging behind
Yes. Yes.
where things are going. So I'm curious if you have any experience in seeing firsthand or hearing how is there a gap at all? So recent graduates
Hmm.
through this new AI space, are they meeting the demands of the employers or are employers the same as higher ed and struggling to keep up right now? And yeah, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. So we're seeing lots of trends in that way. And what it really comes down to is measuring AI readiness, and no one knew how to really do that. So, over the course of the past year, we created this proprietary psychometric diagnostic called the Flip Factor, and really trying to understand, how ready are you? How ready is your team? And so, the Flip Factor, for really kind of define it, is a simple diagnostic to help you understand how are you integrating AI? How well are you integrating AI into your life, into your work, into all of these things? Measured against the other dimension of how supportive is the environment that you are in, whether it's your
Mm,
company, your organization, your school, your professor, your teacher, your leader, right? Whoever it is, of getting them to understand you need that support, that safe space, the psychological safety to test and learn from the AI, because the problem is AI isn't like, here's a calculator, learn how to use it. It's you have to train the AI. You have to almost deconstruct your role or the way that you're learning and things and use AI to augment, yourself. And so one of the biggest things that we're seeing is that the research is showing that the junior individuals coming into the workplace are really eager to use the AI. And your leaders are saying you must use AI. We have to evolve, in order to get more market share and all this. But the middle managers are the ones who are a little more hesitant, which makes sense because they're the ones who have been taught and rewarded for the past 2 decades or so that effort equals success. And now they're being told you have to reinvent the way that you've been doing work successfully and be able to leverage AI to have more impact. And so sometimes we're seeing that where there may be a bit of a bottleneck where yes, on the front end, it may be a little bit more heavy lifting and a little bit more time consuming to reinvent the workflow and reinvent the way that you're doing work. But then you're going to see it compound really fast at the end after you do that. And so getting people, like you said, to trust that whatever the effort that you put in to kind of like reinvent and introduce AI into your workflows is going to pay off, but you are going to have this really tough period where it's trial and error, you're making mistakes and all of that
it's
kind of stuff.
overwhelming. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so that's what we're seeing, and we're seeing that the junior population is very eager, they're very malleable, and they're very open to this testing and learning, and they're actually probably just more tech fluid in terms of, ready to adopt and a little more agile than others. And so we're seeing that trend where it's almost the middle management is a little bit more of the bottleneck and the friction compared to junior or senior. The one thing that we're also seeing is those entry level roles are definitely the ones that have been most impacted, because those junior level, entry level roles tend to have been the most, I would say, kind of the rote, automated, kind of repetitive administrative type of work. And now AI can do a lot of that. But what they still need, what we like to say, are orchestrators of these AI agents. You can't just hand it over to AI and AI take care of it. You have to have the person, an individual come in who has this level of discernment and judgment to say, is this AI output valid? Is it reputable? Is it correct? Right. And making sure that then you start to tweak, the tool, the guidelines that you're giving it. And so what we're seeing is the young kind of campus graduates of saying you have to start to learn how to really orchestrate or learn
Mhm.
how to be managers of all of these AI agents, but putting yourself in the loop where it might be 80% AI, 20% kind of the human judgment, but it needs to be 10% in the front where you set all the parameters, the restrictions, and minimize the risk, telling it what to do, let it do the work. And then the last 10% where you're coming in and polishing it and making sure it's right and all of that type of stuff. Now the output can be multiplied where instead of one report a day or a week, you can churn out, 10 reports a day or a week.
Mhm.
And so that's where we're starting to see some of those things where it's been hard. Organizations are having to also reinvent the job descriptions and really say,
Yeah.
who are we hiring and what are we hiring for? And they're really hiring for individuals who are more agile and who are more, I would say, AI fluent in that they don't have to be able to say, I know how to use X, Y, or Z tool, but like, I know how to work with AI. That is the key skill, right? There's no, because it's evolving and changing so much. The way that I did work a month ago has changed because Anthropic and Claude and ChatGPT and all these tools have changed also the way. So you've got to be that agile person who's like, I know how to work with AI. I can pivot with AI. That's what they're wanting to see in individuals.
I appreciate that. Okay, so this makes me think. So what I hear you saying is that junior employees or recent graduates, it is a necessary and important skill to be able to work with AI
Mhm.
and be malleable. But
Yeah.
are they possessing the critical thinking skills to understand what is real and what is not? Or is there an over reliance on AI? Does that make sense? So we can
Yes. Yes.
say that I understand and I can work with
Mhm.
AI, but then there's a different level of a type of experience that's required and understanding. I can work with it, but how do I know what's real and what's not? And how do I
And
know how to dig deeper and
yeah,
all of
and
that?
that's the
Yeah.
$1,000,000 question. That's that whole kind of like, where we say people squared is kind of like the human creativity and the contextual knowledge. That contextual knowledge is really hard, right? And so that's where, we're trying to figure out ways of, are there apprenticeship like things where there's some transfer of knowledge of that type of critical thinking, making sure that the younger generations coming in are understanding, and sometimes that's lived experience, like you get it wrong, you get it slapped on the wrist and then it's like, okay, I know now not what to do. Because you're absolutely right, like if the output is just being trusted for the output that's coming out, they're not learning that critical thinking and they're not learning to kind of almost debate with the AI, right, of saying, that doesn't sound right,
Challenge
or
and yeah,
gut check, this doesn't feel right. And then you challenge the AI and they're like, oh, you're absolutely right. I, did this or that. And so people are having to start to really learn how to have more of those debate conversations where you are kind of using the critical thinking and making sure that, you're building almost sub agents to bring you 4 or 5 different perspectives and say, here's the output. But then you even have, another tool that you kind of spit it over and say, poke holes in this. And you start to see where the AI may have been 80% right, but there's some holes in that thing. So critical thinking skills are exceptionally important because you do have to. I mean, one of the tools I use all the time it's called Chat Hub. And what it is, it's this interface that you can put your prompt in there. You can ask the question that you're wanting to ask, but it'll prompt ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, and Perplexity all at the same time. And then you can see how different some of the answers are. And you start to see how Perplexity is very research based and will actually give you the sources and all of these things so that you can kind of pressure test the information. But then you can see how, ChatGPT didn't mention that part of it. And you can see where the holes are at. And then you can kind of then start to yourself with through critical thinking. It's almost kind of like you're getting perspective or getting opinions from four different,
Mm.
personalities and four different people. So you have to start learning to do that so that you can feel confident in the output that you're getting. And so that's where the critical thinking, you're right on par where, people are saying junior people need to definitely work still or have some sort of level of exposure to, these middle managers, senior leaders, or others who can transfer that knowledge. And it needs to be more of like an apprenticeship type of role so that they can start to learn what is not right and what is wrong from that. And so part of it is building the workflows from a team and understanding the why. And so a really easy thing you can do in Claude, ChatGPT, any of them is to say, I'm working on this task. I want you to help me do this research. When you give me the output, tell me why and where you got this information, what and why you think that this is right. So you start asking it the
To
logic
prove
behind
itself. Yeah.
where the output is coming from, so you start to learn the critical thinking as well. And so it's almost kind of like when you tell someone do the math but show me the work, like, don't just do the short division thing, show me the work. I want to see the long division so I can see your logic. You can tell AI to do the same thing for you. Don't just spit out the answer. I want you to show me why you are giving me this answer and the rationale behind it so that I can discern whether or not that was right or not. And so it's just the way that you start to learn to use AI in the right ways.
Are employers open to taking on this apprenticeship responsibility themselves, or are they expecting recent grads to come in with the ability to challenge AI and understand the critical thinking aspect? And are they getting what they want? Are there any gaps there at this point?
There's certainly gaps, I think, because we're all being disrupted, right? Higher education is being disrupted, so are the companies themselves. But for all the organizations that I worked at, and I only know this because when I was head of diversity recruiting, I was also, campus recruiting, going on campus and
Mm,
pulling in the students. Most of these organizations will have their very rigid, 1 to 2 year analyst programs, or they're bringing students in through internships and then they bring them on. And your first 2 years at most organizations is they are training you to do work the way they do work, right? And what we're seeing now is most of these organizations do know that there is going to be a gap in what the student has learned from a theoretical perspective and really from a practical perspective. How are they actually going to apply that at the organization? So many organizations are thinking about how do we reinvent our analyst programs or our kind of like 1 to 2 year entry level programs so that we can train them to use the AI the way that we do. And you will get exposure in this in to that contextual knowledge of starting to learn why there's these checks and balances or why we run these kind of workflows before it ever reaches a client or any of those types of things. So I would say that many organizations, at least your Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies, are thinking about how do we make sure we're training individuals to do the work the way that we need them to do work. I would say even pre AI, that's what they were doing because, students would come in with a lot of theoretical book knowledge and a lot of intelligence, but the application of it sometimes, that's where the internships would come in. And that's where these types of programming where it's like on the job, that the kinesthetic learning of like almost going from the theoretical lecture to I'm in the lab now and I'm
what am I going to
putting
do?
chemicals in the beaker to see what the reaction really is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. We're actually at the university I work at, I support faculty development and navigating AI in their
Mhm.
teaching and learning. And we are hosting an employer panel in the next couple of months to really ask these types of core
Mhm.
questions. What are you seeing from your recent graduates? Are they meeting the standards of what you expect them to with AI
Mhm.
basic literacy? And how is that? is there an over reliance on AI from recent grads? So I like to think of it as just like the weirdest time ever in higher ed. Like, there are probably students who have gotten through an entire degree program relying on AI and not be any more of a critical thinker or intelligent, well rounded individual at the end of it because they've just literally skirted the entire
Mhm.
process because us educators and institutions are behind and we really don't know what we're doing yet. And we're all trying to figure this out at the same time. So it's just a really, I think, a crappy time for students. Like
Yeah.
they are, while we are
It's
all
difficult.
figuring it out.
It's like you
Yeah,
said,
it's
we're
difficult,
all a
right?
little overwhelmed, and one of those things, I mean, I used to scratch my head where I would have some professors where I remember, and gosh, this is decades ago, right? Where it's just like, okay, you would study for your test and you'd come in and make sure you only have a pencil, nothing around you, no watches, no anything, no pagers because someone could page you the
Major
answer.
life back
Something
in the
crazy,
day.
right?
Yes.
And it was like you had to recall everything from your brain. And then I had other teachers in the same semester say it's totally open book. And the
Hmm.
reality, their logic was like, listen, if you become some doctor or some expert in something, you've got to go be able to refer to the references and all of that to get it right. I feel like AI is the same way. You can't like handcuff a student and say you cannot use AI. You've got to do it only this way because the reality is the companies that they're going to go work for are using AI and they want their students to know how to use AI. And so I remember there was Amazon, AWS, there was a global study that they partnered with Pearson and it just got released this month, but 53% of employers are saying that they struggle to find AI ready graduates. And partly it's because some of these schools are saying, nope, you can't use AI. And so then the graduates are coming out there not prepared to be able to use the AI or theoretically knowing how to partner with AI, right? And it was something like 78% of educators think that they're meeting employer needs though. And so
A
that's the
little
big
bit of a
conundrum, right?
discrepancy.
I think it was only 14% of graduates reported high proficiency, like they themselves didn't have the confidence. Only about 14% said, yes, I know how to apply AI tools in professional workflows. And so that's where I was saying companies are realizing that they're having to reinvent their entry level programs to teach the students how to use AI. The study, it was something like they identified six compounding friction, right? It's the pace of AI. Like you may learn how to use an AI tool, but it's going to update and change. So the pace of change, connection, the capability, the governance, and the experience is those areas that are lacking. And so how do you kind of make sure that you are helping them? The slower the education or the transition from education to work, that's where the gap is, and that's the hardest thing. And so
Mhm.
employees they're having to choose between a candidate with strong AI skills but no degree versus having a degree but very limited AI skills. We've seen some scary things where even Ernst and Young was reporting that they're sometimes hiring the students who are very very AI fluent and savvy who may not have a 4-year degree. And then through their programming they can train the individuals opposed to hiring the 4-year graduate isn't as AI fluent. And so that's where we're starting to see some organizations and probably a lot of some of the startups saying, well, if I'm going to college campuses and not getting AI ready students, then I might just need to go find the AI ready individuals who don't maybe have as much formal education. And so that's the conundrum that we're starting to see. It's not overwhelming, but at least we know that 53% of employers are saying that the graduates aren't AI ready. And that's the scary part.
Interesting. Yeah. So I was actually reading a study recently from the Global Recruiter. It's from a
Uh-huh.
year ago, and it actually says employers are reporting declines in core human skills. So
Good.
I made some notes here. 54% say graduates lack self awareness.
Good.
46% report issues with resilience, and 46% report weak written communication. And I suspect as an educator, I'm floored with the level of written communication and how it has changed just even in the past couple of years and how that could potentially affect employers in the future because of over reliance on AI. through that development phase where post-secondary is usually a lot about writing
Yeah.
and refining your ability to convince or sway or argue through written communication and also verbal communication, and that AI can take that away. It's a really interesting conundrum, but to see that employers are reporting declines in core human skills, that resonates at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I mean, there is this fine line, and that's where we say humans have to stay human, and the students and the individuals who are going to get ahead in this world are the people who are going to be able to hone still those the human qualities, the soft skills per se, right, that AI is never going to be able to replace. Right, we need to graduate what we call agentic humans, people who take initiative with AI rather than waiting for someone to tell them what tools to use. That's going to be the difference between a student who survives in the next 5 years to one who actually thrives. And I would say that most of my, I would say, true education or experience that really helped me excel in the workplace was that, yes, I went to class. I got really good grades, but I also was very involved on campus, and I was in the student government, and I was, leadership in the student Hispanic student organizations. And I did a lot of the leadership type things that really honed my people skills. And so those are the individuals who are going to thrive, the people who can still differentiate themselves from the AI, like you said, and definitely using the people skills, the discernment, the communication skills, the one who's able to be the translator between the AI, to leaders who may not be as AI savvy, right? The reality is that the senior leadership are going to be less AI or less agentic than their junior population, but the ones who are going to excel are the ones who are going to be that translator between the technology to those leaders who want you to just explain it to them in layman's terms. That is one thing that I tell people is that if you want to be successful, you need to build all of those soft skills, and sometimes that's not classroom. That's,
Right.
that's getting out there and getting experience and doing lots of different extracurricular things that are really going to hone those softer skills.
So, in your experience and opinion, what do you think higher ed or institutions could be doing better to support this change, support their graduates?
This is the conversation in every classroom, right?
Mm,
Students should use AI to amplify their thinking, but not outsource it, right? You don't want to
not
outsource your
replace it.
thinking to the
Yeah.
AI. The goal is not to get AI to write the paper, it is to use AI to think more deeply about the paper, about the topic, right? Of being able to say, now I have an unlimited access to the sources and to more research that even isn't one-sided or biased. Right now I can get both perspectives. If I'm studying a topic about some sort of, I don't know, some sort of drug that's going to cure cancer, I'm not just going to get access to the research that's saying here are all the good things about it. I'm also now have access to all the things of saying this is the adverse reactions that's going to happen. So now I have a more informed paper, but I don't want AI to write the paper for me. Getting students to understand that the most successful people in the workplace are going to be people who use AI as a tool, not as a crutch. Because I guarantee you right now, people can see through an AI generated answer and one that has had some thought and critical thinking behind it. So, what I try to tell people is that you have to learn how to take artificial intelligence and layer your authentic intelligence on top of it. And so
Mm.
you have your own AI, which is your authentic intelligence, paired with the AI is going to end up being this, amplified, impactful outcome that now we're trying to say impact equals success. You're only going to be successful if you have better impact. And that is if you bring that, like you were saying, the critical thinking, the lived experience, the learned experience. And you don't get that experience until you really get your hands dirty and really start, the trial and error and having that safe place and the psychological safety to do that trial and error. But like you said, you're going to have those individuals who are going to skirt the system and use AI for everything. But when they come to a real world problem where they actually have to use discernment and they don't necessarily have a computer terminal in front of them, they're going to fail. And so that's where you want to tell them AI is a tool, it's not the crutch.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because So even the idea of it's not about output anymore, like, so we're not analyzing the end result of an essay or a submission. We're looking at more of the process, the learning process, and how has
Exactly.
AI supported you in going
Mhm.
deeper with your research. But it's difficult to analyze or assess an output anymore because it may not be fully human. And I've had in my classes complete AI generated outputs that are off base, but the students didn't understand that it was not even related to the question
Yes.
because they
Yes.
trusted AI so much. So it's an interesting conversation. But I think what it comes back to at the end of the day is that in order to have that type of classroom or redesign our classrooms to be more process and learning related, educators must understand or have a basic digital fluency or understanding of AI, what it is, how it influences learning, and how students are using it. And I think
Mhm.
there's still a big gap, and it's going to take a few years for educators to educate themselves and
Mhm.
catch up. And then
Yeah.
unfortunately, there are students that are going to get it's frustrating for students because you have some professors who are AI literate and understand the impact and have redesigned their classrooms to support learning in that capacity. And then there are other educators where they are against AI and you can't use it in their classroom. And so every educator has a different point of view and understanding. And it can be a really confusing time for students and even educators working with each other. Um, that's why, as I mentioned, we're currently working on an AI for Educators certification series
Mhm.
to help educators understand what AI is, what the
Yes.
impact is, some of the different basic tools. I did not know about Chat Hub, so I'm going to
Yeah.
check that out. That sounds so perfect for some of the stuff that we're designing. But it's it's almost like education has been turned on its head. Professors who've been in their profession for a long period of time, they've got things down. They have a
Yeah.
nice groove, a nice rotation, and then boom, AI comes in. And not everyone is willing or open to uprooting their entire classroom dynamic and everything that they've built. Coming back to what we were talking about earlier, it really is about change management and mindset.
Yes.
But there are a lot of folks in education that we cannot force to
Mhm.
change the way that they're doing things. And
Yes.
that puts students in a really interesting position because now they're navigating different professors and their understanding and expectations. So it's an interesting time for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's some research out there that Gartner is predicting, Gartner research where in the workplace where they're saying that there are going to be organizations, and I want to say that maybe they partnered with Deloitte or somebody, one of the big fours, but that companies will also be almost testing their employees and their people to make sure they still understand the critical thinking part. They understand the how and the why instead of just always the AI. So in other words, like the analogy would be like every now and then they're going to test all their employees and say, you need to parallel park by yourself and not
Right,
be able to
right.
push the button for the car to parallel park on its own. We want to check every now and then that you're able to do it the old school way so that if things break down, business, business continuity still happens. And so companies are very, also leery and worried that AI can't do everything. The human still has to stay in the loop. And how do you make sure that people still know how to do the long division, right? And so many of them will be doing periodically these things to make sure that their people are able to do without the AI. And so that's where you're saying there's this fine line of making sure that individuals understand the long division of, how do you do it? And so, when you think about hospitals and healthcare where yes, you have these surgeons now using the robotic tools to help do the surgery, but at the same time, you want to make sure that if the robot breaks down, that they could still do the surgery without the robot. And so many of them are trying to figure out how do you keep that practical kind of knowledge and the contextual knowledge and the expertise sharp and it not have that what people are afraid of, the AI atrophy, right? The atrophy of, becoming dumber because you're relying on the AI way too
Yeah.
much. And so I do think from a human perspective, there are still the type A individuals who are going to want to make sure that like AI is not making me dumber. So I'm going to make sure that I'm keeping, myself sharp, where I'm not going to just, run on the treadmill all day long and then think I can go do a marathon because I didn't anticipate the road and the incline and the hard surfaces and things like that, where it's just like you get the runners who like train outside and train inside because you don't want the technology to cause some sort of atrophy of that muscle or that expertise.
That makes sense for sure. I love that analogy of the treadmill. That's so perfect. It's funny because for my businesses, I've been using AI for years. I was recently looking at a graduate paper that I wrote a few years ago. And I was like,
Hmm.
oh man, I could write. Like that was me. I wrote
Yeah.
that. And I'm just, wow, what have I become now that
Hmm.
everything I do is so AI partnered that what if I had to now write an essay on my own? Could I do it's so funny that we naturally through regular use can't become over reliant and then
Hmm.
question our own skills. When just a few years ago, I was writing impeccably. And now I question my ability to write at that same level. But as a business person, it has absolutely accelerated our workflows for sure. But it's funny because I was like, wow, that was me. I wrote that all by myself before AI. And I fear that you know, recent graduates will never have that experience of really being forced to write at that level and understand the importance of being able to. What if AI crashes and you have to do everything yourself? God forbid. Would they have that actual skill set?
Yeah.
Because even in our classroom, when we're partnering with AI, it's still augmenting their writing process in some capacity versus not having it. And it's really interesting because the more I know, I'm actually becoming more against it in the classroom because we are losing that critical thinking aspect. And I'm very pro AI. I think it's here. We must partner with it. But in terms of our students being able to write a full essay on their own, can they do that? Do they have the ability to understand these and then critically analyze? I think in terms of business, it is an incredible acceleration and partner. But
Yeah.
in terms of education, I think we are losing so much because we are
Absolutely.
now, yeah, 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 yeah.
What
I mean,
I
it's
mean,
changing,
it's
right?
changing the educator role, right?
Yes.
Educators, what people have to realize, educators are not being replaced. They're being asked to teach in a world that is
Different.
fundamentally different from the
Yeah.
one they were trained for, right?
Yeah.
We were trained to teach and transfer knowledge in a different era, pre AI. And so the role shifts from content delivery to capability build has it's shifted, right? It goes from, instead of just delivering a bunch of content, it's now developing capabilities for students to be able to leverage the AI. And so professors have to become coaches who help students develop judgment, critical thinking, and the ability to work alongside AI, not letting AI replace them, right? And so, just like I mentioned, the Pearson study shows that the 78% of educators think that they are meeting employer needs, but only 14% of graduates feel AI proficient. And that gap right there is an opportunity for those professors and those leaders who say, I'm going to help close that gap and I'm going to teach students how to partner with AI opposed to let AI do everything. It's really, driving to the student that the judgment, critical thinking, and the ability to work alongside AI. Companies are looking for the critical thinking. They're looking for the judgment. They're looking for those human skills that are going to differentiate the AI output from like the artificial intelligence to the authentic intelligence. They are looking for the authentic intelligence. And that is where the students really have to, prepare them. The three things that I say is we can't ban AI completely, but we have to start integrating it into assignments with intention. How are they allowed to use the AI? And maybe you break it up in phases where it's like you have to do the critical thinking first and really turn in kind of like this your own this idea, and then let's bring in the AI to augment and help you get the outcome that you were looking for.
Mhm. And educators have to understand that process themselves in
Yes.
order to then share it. And that's where some of the gaps are still happening too.
Yes.
We're
Ab-
literally working on a course right now that is like, do we integrate AI into this assessment or assignment? Where and when? Right. And it gets
yeah.
really specific.
Yeah.
Um, I was just thinking about at this point, at least from my perspective in higher ed, is that we need to be continuing and having more conversations with employers to really
Yes.
understand where those gaps are happening. And for educators that may not be as AI fluent, if they're understanding the needs of employers,
Hmm.
maybe that might be an aspect of change management in institutions to really help guide them in the direction that needs to be to support their students. Because just saying to educators who have tenure that, we need to integrate AI,
Yes.
it can be tricky, right? If
It
people
is
don't
very,
want
very
to.
tricky.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And there is a place, like you said, it's still critical. The critical
yeah,
thinking is still critical. Um, you know, and that's the other part is the critical thinking that someone brings to the AI is what trains the AI to be better, right?
right,
And
right.
and
Yeah,
the AI can only have better outputs if you use that judgment and the critical thinking to train it in that way. And so that's the other thing is the whole idea that AI gets trained by the human. And so the human is flawed. So there's going to be flaws in the AI as well. But if we don't use the AI and you're not training the AI, then yes, you're going to be getting these biased outputs or these outputs that don't have that judgment and that critical thinking applied to it. And so, it's a fine line, right? We're at this juxtaposition of like we have to prepare the students to be AI ready and AI fluent. And how do we do that? And I agree with you. We have to start partnering with more enterprises, companies, small, medium, large enterprises to say, how do we partner and how do we help, these students? And so, I too am working on some exciting things with UNT University of North Texas, Dallas here, where they're opening up a new Tide Center, which is technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, and all of these things. But partnering with the local business to say, bring us a problem that you're having right now in your operational organization and how do we hack that with students so that students can see this is how things are working right now, where's the friction, and then how might you apply AI to fix it, but they're still understanding and learning the how and the why it's being applied.
that's really interesting. It reminds me of a study that I saw. Might bungle this a little bit, but employers are noticing that students are overrating their skills because they're using AI on their resumes. And then they're getting into these jobs and they're not quite the best fit. So it almost makes me think, too, that employers might need to come up with some sort of critical thinking exercise or
Yes.
AI related output exercise as part of their interview process to be able to catch these moments. It's easy for us to oversell ourselves, especially
Yeah.
given, yeah, for
I mean,
sure.
that's the biggest conundrum, being a former recruiter at a company. The irony
Yeah,
is that people are using AI to tailor their
we
resume to
force ourselves
match
on.
the job description
Yes.
exactly. And
Yeah,
so in the past, you used to have, we started using AI ourselves to say, filter out and, match all of these people out of the thousands of applications, we'd get maybe 100. And we're like, okay, now they're getting like 1,000 applications and 1,000 that
yeah,
match. And the irony is now they're using AI to do the initial interview, one of the first interviews of saying, you're going to interview with an AI avatar, but it's going to be all conversational. The avatar is going to ask you to kind of talk about your experience. How would you solve this problem? And you're going to have to speak about it and think on your toes and critical thinking to weed out people to say, okay, now you move on to the real person in live interview, and so they're using AI to combat AI. And so it's just really interesting. Like you said, they're trying to discern now where students who are inflating or kind of getting their resumes to match exactly. It's like, okay, your gut check, like, this is too good to be true. We can't have a thousand people who match this job description perfectly. Now we've got to figure out how does that selection process, how do we filter out the true candidates who do have those critical thinking judgment skills. And it's those types of things where they're going to communicate. It comes down to communication, to judgment, to, like you said, the critical thinking where you can explain how you would solve something in a live interview.
Yeah, I love that. So I can talk forever about this. It's just such a passion of mine.
Yeah.
Despite me becoming more negative towards AI as of late in the classroom, it's just such an interesting topic. And I think to be part of
Hmm.
this time, and also as a business person, Monica, like to be have a business that's AI related, it's just perfect. When else in history, other than maybe the beginning of the internet, have
Hmm.
business people had these types of opportunities? It's pretty exciting, I think. And as educators, it just begs a little bit more of us, or a lot more of us, right? And that's where institutions, I think, really need to step up and provide that level of support
Yeah.
for their educators and really understand where those gaps are in the classroom. As we start to wind down the conversation, what would your piece of advice be for a
Hmm.
brand new educator coming into post-secondary world? What do you think they could do to help prepare their students for an AI partnered world? What do you think their responsibility could be?
I really do think that they have to see themselves as, like you said, the the coach or the individual who really helps them develop that judgment and the critical thinking, and getting them to understand that that is going to be the differentiating superpower from the AI augmented employee, right? The reality is that everybody has access to AI now. So everybody's going to have the very intelligent output. And so it's all going to look like oranges. Well, they're going to, look for someone who brings in the different, like the apples and the pineapples and all of that. And that is the authentic intelligence. That's only going to come from students really developing that judgment and the critical thinking, and really learning how to almost debate with the AI, right? Like really being able to say, yes, AI is my thinking partner, but I want to be able to poke holes in whatever the AI is thinking, and, be able to still have my independent thinking of saying, well, what if and what if? It's almost kind of like that old adage or that practice of, like, ask why 5 times, so that whatever problem you're solving or whatever answer is like, well, why am I going to do this? And why and why and why? And really being that kind of antagonist with the AI of like, well, why did you give me this answer? And why is this? And why is that? So that you could start to build that judgment. And so I really do feel like there is a huge opportunity for educators out there to become that, you know, that bridge of getting students to understand how they need to become AI ready. They're going to fall behind if they don't know how to apply the AI. And getting individuals to understand that you can't just apply AI to any workflow or to any kind of process, because if there's some flaws in the process, AI is just going to amplify those flaws. So how do you actually reinvent the process? And that's what we have to do as educators, is reinvent the process in which we're teaching the students, to deconstruct it and figure out what parts can handle AI, like that you need AI, and what parts does the human still have to play the key critical role around the judgment, the discernment, the critical thinking, the lived experience, the creativity that they bring, because that's the reality. Companies are doing that all day long now. As they're taking workflows, they're deconstructing them and saying, where does AI play the part and where does the human play the part? And we have to teach the students where those critical human parts are.
I love that. Just going back to hiring processes,
Yes.
I'm part of a team that is supporting Thompson Rivers University mission or vision of becoming a leader in applied AI by 2030. And
Hmm.
so I'm begging the question, or inviting the question, how are our current hiring processes of educators coming into the university or into this space?
Hmm.
What are we asking of their basic understanding or AI in their teaching practices? Are they for it or against it? If we want to become a leader in applied AI, what are we asking of our new educators coming into the field? We can't change older educators and mindsets. We can work with them for transformation within the system. But who are we now hiring? What are their mindsets? Are we sticking to old ones or are we adjusting our hiring processes as well? Which I think is really important. Just like new grads coming into employment and having those AI skills, what about new educators? Right?
Yeah.
What do we want them to have in terms of their mindset coming in? Which I
Yeah. I
think
mean,
is
I
an
think
interesting question too.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind for me is it goes even back to the fundamentals, right? Of like Carol
Yeah,
Dweck and the growth mindset. Like educators today have to have that growth mindset, which means you have to be able to, from an identity perspective, be able to feel like the person who can adopt to AI, right? We have to challenge that growth mindset. And the irony is that sometimes you're in these higher education places where we talk about education and, education is growth, but at the same time, these educators who are kind of like stuck in their old ways. It's like
yeah,
you aren't adopting this growth mindset. We have to evolve. We have to make sure that we're evolving with the environment around us. And AI, unfortunately, and this is what where I started the conversation with is that AI is disrupting the world faster than people that our brains are wired to evolve and change. And so that is what's causing all of the friction is that we can't change as fast as we need to change because AI is really disrupting. And so this growth mindset, it used to be we have to really even escalate the urgency of that. Like it used to be like, okay, people will adopt and in 1 or 2 years or in 5 years, everybody will have come along. We're talking months and quarters now. It's just like the way that AI is changing. And so we have to really disrupt ourselves before we get disrupted. That's the growth mindset that we have to adopt. And the educators coming in have to be comfortable with that.
yeah. I agree. I work for a number of different institutions sessionally. So I take on different courses
Uh-huh.
at different places, as well as my full time work. And I've never once in an interview been asked about my AI skills or my AI philosophy in teaching and learning. And I think that needs to change.
Yes.
It starts with who we're hiring into our systems now in
hmm
terms of the type of institution we want to be.
I mean, I think what we have to get people to realize is that, this is kind of like a revolution of sorts of what's
Yeah.
happening. But we have to look back at history, right? It's just like, when, you had the people building the pyramids, it was all manual labor. And then they introduced the cranes and the mechanical things and people started learning to use that, but it didn't replace the people. We evolved in the way we started building. I remember when Excel came out a long time ago and like, oh my God, that's the end of CPAs. Like we're going to be used for now. There's more CPAs, than there were back then. And so we have to understand that AI is the same thing. AI is a tool that is just helping the output have more impact. And so really thinking about the core insights of people with a fixed mindset believe their abilities are static. And in this post AI world, you're not going to survive. People with that growth mindset believe their abilities can be developed through effort and learning. And that's where you have to let them know that AI is really going to help them augment and really embracing this idea of authentic intelligence is what's going to get people ahead.
I love this. Monica, thank you so much for your time and joining
Yeah.
from Texas. I have to ask, what is your weather like today? We just had snow in Kamloops a
Oh my
couple of
goodness.
nights ago.
Yeah, I went for a walk this morning at 9 a.m. and it was already 78 degrees and sunny. So it's a really sunny day today in
I'm
Texas, in North
jealous.
Texas anyway.
I'm so jealous. Well, thank you again for joining us. This has been a really invigorating, interesting conversation to hear your perspective from the corporate world. And what we can be doing to help bridge that gap, not just as educators, but institutions. How can we
Yeah.
support our educators? So
Yes.
thank you so
Well,
much.
I have a weekly newsletter. It's called I AI. It's a throwback to my Latino
I can
history.
I was like, ay, ay, ay.
The joke is that, with my new company, I was telling my grandmother and my, relatives what I was doing. And I was like talking about AI and my grandmother was like, ay, 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 like, AI. And I was like, that's
Perfect.
a great name for the newsletter. But it's a weekly newsletter and it introduces you to new tools and things and how people are applying it in work or how you can apply it. But it helps people get kind of familiar with becoming a little more AI fluent. We also here at Flipwork have our AI readiness diagnostic that we're gonna soon, very soon,
This is
open it up
cool.
to the public for everybody to take this diagnostic and at least get a benchmark of where you're at. And then it has some really great advice on how you start to become more agentic and become an agentic human.
That's really exciting. And so what else is in your future? What other neat things are you working on that you can share?
Yeah, so we've always been a B2B company, so working with companies helping their people become more agentic, but we've been getting so much inbound interest from individuals saying my company hasn't brought you in and I know that I'm going to get left behind. So we recently started piloting some, just open cohorts where we have people come in, they take the diagnostic, and then we have what we call Flippy, our AI change agent. It's a tool that kind of works and we focus on mindset, but we also help people start to reinvent themselves in the way that they do work. How do you leverage workflows? How do you actually put AI into your workflows and do better work and focus on the impact? And so people go through these 90-day or 30-day sprints of becoming more agentic and getting more familiar on how do you augment with AI, not replace yourself with AI. And so really getting people to start to be able to actually articulate what is their zone of genius? What is it about them? What is their superpower that AI is never going to replace? And it always comes down to the judgment, the critical thinking, their lived experience, their contextual knowledge, their expertise, and really being able to articulate that and then know how to use AI to amplify that.
That's so exciting. Yeah, when there are requests from the masses, you gotta build stuff.
I know, I
You're like,
know.
"All right, B2C, here we
So more
go."
to come on that. Just, keep your eye out on flipwork.ai and you'll start seeing more and more and
Absolutely.
hearing about the flip factor. And by all means, I'll send you the link and you can take it yourself and kind of get an
I'm
idea of,
excited.
your AI readiness.
Yeah, and see how we can maybe integrate it into some of our courses as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for educators. And we will include all the links in the show notes so people will have access to all of your fabulous information and your newsletter. And I will sign up today. Thanks so much for your time, Monica. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Sally.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of the Educator Experience. We hope you're walking away feeling connected, inspired, and just a little bit more supported on your journey. Ready to go a little bit deeper? Join the Educator Experiences community and check out our courses and workshops specifically designed to support new educators as they navigate the ups, downs, and everything in between. You'll find it all at educatorexperiences.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, share it with a fellow educator and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Together, we're building a vibrant community rooted in support and connection. See y'all next Monday.